Bible reading now, and we're going to be taking that from Luke's Gospel, chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "Well, what shall I do? I have no place to store up my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." Ralph is going to bring today's sermon.
Well, it's great to be with you again this afternoon, City Church, and friends watching online, as we look at this next parable, Luke chapter 12. Last month, the hoarding and price gouging task force of the FBI seized no less than 192,000 respirator masks, 130,000 surgical masks, and 598,000 medical-grade gloves, all in a single raid. Stockpilers aren't exactly popular at the moment, are they? Especially when they're exploiting shortages in medical supplies. But stockpiling is certainly going on. And what people stockpile reveals what they value. So one of the discoveries of the COVID-19 crisis is that Australians really value wiping their bums with soft tissue. That's why they led the world in stockpiling toilet roll. And Brits, well, it seems that we Brits, we really value beer. At least that's strongly suggested by all the crates of beer being delivered in my housing complex right now. And as for Americans, well, their first instinct as lockdown loomed was to stock up on guns. What we stockpile shows what we value. It reveals where our heart is at. And today we're going to look at a parable that gives stockpilers a very solemn warning. Take a look at verses 13 to 21 of Luke chapter 12. And the first thing we see in this parable is the blindness of stockpiling. Look at verses 13 to 15. It gives us the background to Jesus' parable. Jesus has just been teaching a large crowd. He's been speaking about heaven and hell, about judgment and forgiveness. And then suddenly this man pitches up saying, "Teacher, order my brother to fairly distribute our inheritance with me." In the ancient Near East, the older brother was the one who received the family inheritance, and he was then expected to divvy it up between his siblings. So this younger brother, he's coming to Jesus and he's saying, "Tell my brother to give me what I deserve. Jesus, defend my rights." And in many ways, that was an entirely reasonable expectation. You see, this man, he views Jesus as a teacher, a rabbi. And rabbis would have been expected to adjudicate disputes just like this at the time. But Jesus replies, verse 14, "Who made me a judge or an arbiter between you?" More literally, who made me a divider between you? Now that's really interesting because just a few verses later, at the end of chapter 12 in verse 53, that is exactly what Jesus claims to be, a divider. I have come to divide father and son against father. But the family division that Jesus brings is over people's responses to him, not over petty financial disputes. This man has come to Jesus demanding his rights. Give me what I deserve, he says. But you know, that's a really silly thing to say to Jesus if we really understand who he is. Do you want what you deserve from Jesus? Do you? I certainly don't. Because for me, it would mean an express one-way ticket to hell, given my rejection of him. And I suspect the same would be true for you too. Money, possessions, they blind this man to seeing who Jesus really is. And Jesus hadn't come to pass judgment on finances. He'd come to deal with judgment on humanity. He hadn't come to restore balance sheets in the bank. He'd come to restore our relationship with the God who made us. But this man who came to Jesus was blinded to all that. That's why in verse 15, Jesus issues this stark warning. He says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. As far as I'm aware, Jesus never said, watch out. Be on your guard against murder. Why? Is it because greed is a much more serious sin than murder? Well, no, of course not. It's because when you're murdering someone, you kind of know what you're doing, don't you? Greed is much more deceptive. Most of the time, we don't even know we're being greedy. We assume greed is a problem that other people struggle with. A number of members of City Church have signed up to Covenant Eyes. It's an internet accountability software which sends a list of websites that you visited each week to a friend so that friend can hold you accountable on whether you've been looking at pornography. Now imagine that company invented a new program called Greedy Eyes. Instead of sending a list of websites to your accountability friends, Greedy Eyes sends each week your bank statement to them. Now, would you sign up for Greedy Eyes? My guess is that most of us would assume that we just don't need it. And the rest of us, well, that's not the sort of accountability we'd want. You see, greed is a sin that eats our hearts. And as it does so, it blinds us to its existence. The blindness of stockpiling. Secondly, let's take a look at the heart behind stockpiling. Jesus tells his hearers a parable in verses 16 to 19. It's about a man who, to all intents and purposes, looks as though he's thoroughly successful. Follow the parable with me. Verse 16, the ground of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. Update that to the 21st century and read, the teacher received a double increment in her annual review. The business entrepreneur saw the value of his company double. Nothing wrong with that. It is good to make money and to be successful. Next verse 17. And the man thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Again, there's nothing wrong there. It is entirely appropriate to deliberate about how to spend a windfall or an increase in income. But then verse 18, and his greed is exposed. And what I'd like us to see is that he's looking to his wealth to provide three things. First up, he's looking to it for approval. Take a look at verses 17 to 19. Now notice how many times in these verses I, me, or my are used. 9 times in just 3 verses. This man is utterly self-obsessed, and he's convinced that the reason he needs these bigger barns is because he is a farming genius. But verse 16 puts that lie to bed. It was the ground, not the man, that yielded an abundant harvest. It is common for us today to speak about self-made millionaires. People like Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, who grew up in a housing complex for the poor, but now has a net worth of $2.4 billion. Now, it's true that people like Schultz, they've got where they are through amazing drive and determination, but they are not self-made people. No way. Did Schultz choose his IQ? Did he decide to be born in the United States rather than Iran? Did he choose to get a scholarship to North Michigan University? No, all of those things were gifts from God. When we look to possessions to gain us approval, it will lead to greed and it will lead to bragging. And you know what? It will be self-defeating, because no one really likes people who look for approval because of what they own and brag about it. And you know, if they do like you, if people do start praising you because of your wealth or your reputation or your possessions, you know what will always be in the back of your mind? Do they really like me? Or is it just my stuff they're interested in? The second thing the man looks to his wealth to provide is security. That's why he tears down his barns and builds bigger, better ones. He doesn't simply want to store up enough grain for a fallow year. No, he wants enough to last a lifetime. At the peak of his wealth, John D. Rockefeller had a net worth of 1% of the US economy. That makes even Bill Gates look like a pauper by comparison. Rockefeller was once asked, "How much is enough?" His reply, "Just a little bit more." If we look to wealth to provide security, it will lead to two things: overwork and anxiety. We'll overwork because, just like John Rockefeller, we'll always think we need a little bit more for a rainy day, a little bit more for when the next coronavirus hits. And we'll forever be anxious. You know, the most anxious time in my life was probably just before I left lecturing law to go into pastoral ministry. I owned a house, I had a nice car, I had the biggest salary I had ever had and probably ever will have. But I was anxious because I had so much to lose. Seeking security in wealth leads to overwork and anxiety. Thirdly, the man was looking for comfort in his wealth. Read verse 19 and update it to the 21st century. The businessman received his £1 million bonus and he said, "Hurrah, I've done it. I finally got enough money to retire early. Time to put my feet up, time to relax, start planning which golf course in Scotland to live by, and what ports I'm going to visit on my holiday in my yacht next summer. Champagne and caviar for me." This man was looking to his wealth to find comfort. He assumed that a particular standard of living would make him feel whole. The problem is that wealth and possessions, they're like salt water. They're not bad in themselves, but if you're looking to them to satisfy you, the more you consume, the more you'll thirst for them. And the more you work for comfort, the less you'll enjoy it. It was a busy day in the city of London. The markets were going wild and traders were making money. They were making big money. And one of them was running between their office near London Bridge and over to the stock exchange. And as he ran across the river, out of breath, he looked down to the banks of the river and saw one of his colleagues stretched out on the grass, sipping a cool Coca-Cola and munching on a club steak sandwich. He stopped running and he cried out, "What are you doing? Why aren't you in there in the stock exchange making deals?" "Well, why would I?" he replied. "Well, to make money. We're making a killing today." But why would I want to do that?" "Well, because if you do, you'll get a promotion, and then the next Christmas it's going to be a big bonus for you." But why? Why would I want to do that?" "Well, to save up money, to pay off your mortgage, to clear all your debts." but why would I want that? Well, so you can retire early, so you can go out and sit in the sun, enjoy life, put your feet up. Well, what do you think it is I'm doing right now? That brings us on to our third point this afternoon. The folly of stockpiling. Look at what God says to the man in verse 20. You fool. You fool. It's pretty abrupt, isn't it? Elsewhere in Psalm 14, we read that it is the fool who says in his heart, there is no God. Now, we're not told whether this rich man in the parable believed in God or not, whether he was an atheist in his beliefs. But he certainly was a practical atheist. He lived as if there was no God, as if there was no one to whom he'd have to give an account at the end of his life, and as if he could find approval, security, and comfort in stuff. In the words of verse 15, he lived as if life consisted in the abundance of his possessions, in stuff. And that's folly. Because death will rob us of every last bit of stuff that we've accumulated. The author of War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy, put it well. He wrote, "Is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy?" The COVID-19 crisis, it's really brought the immediacy of death to the forefront of our minds, hasn't it? Before COVID-19, death was always hidden away, something that happened in distant hospices and hospitals and cemeteries. But the graphs we're shown every night on the evening news are a constant reminder to us that life is short. And those chaotic hospital scenes that we've seen on some of the news reels, perhaps they may still seem distant for many of us. And maybe COVID-19 won't be the thing that takes us there. But we'll all end up there eventually. Whether it be cancer or a heart attack, a stroke or a car accident. It is not a matter of if, but when. And when death comes, it will strip away all that we've accumulated. The rich man of our parable, he was a fool because he thought that stockpiling stuff gave him control over his future. But he was wrong, tragically wrong. Listen, money can buy you food, but it can't buy you satisfaction. Money can buy you entertainment, but it can't buy you joy. Money can buy you a trophy wife, but it can't buy you love. Money can buy you private health insurance, but it can't buy you health. Money can buy you a holiday, but it can't buy you rest. Money can buy you a bed, but it can't buy you sleep. Money can buy you life insurance, but it can't buy you life. The folly of stockpiling. So how is it that we can stockpile without backlash? What is the unexpected life hack of this parable? Well, it's this. If you want to be rich, if you want to be really, really rich, empty your barns. And that's a staggering claim to make, isn't it? It goes against every worldview out there. Secular materialism tells us if you want to be rich, fill your barns. You want approval? Well, get a nice car, buy the latest designer fashions, move to a more salubrious part of town, fill your barns. You want security? Well, pay off your mortgage, invest in your pension, take out an ISA, fill your barns. You want comfort? Well, save up for a nice holiday in the sun. Buy a new sofa. How about building that extension you've always wanted to put your games room in? Fill your barns. Even the other world religions, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, they all adopt a fill your barns philosophy. You want approval from God? Well, do good works. Pray lots. Fill your barns. You want to be secure with God? Well, make sure you don't step out of line. Fill your barns. You want comfort? You want to go to paradise? Well, worship regularly. Give your zakah. Fast during Ramadan. Fill your barns. But the gospel says, empty them. Because that is the only way you'll receive the Saviour who emptied himself for you. Listen to this. It's from Philippians chapter 2, verse 6, and it's speaking about Jesus. It says this: though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. What does it mean here when it says he emptied himself? Does it mean that Jesus emptied himself of his deity? Well, no, not at all. It means that he emptied himself of approval. The one who ruled the universe became a servant and was rejected by those he came to serve. He emptied himself for security. The one who occupied the impenetrable fortress of heaven became a weak and fragile man who could bleed and cry and be broken. And listen to this. He emptied himself of comfort. He gave up the luxury of heaven to submit to the agony of a cross. And why did he do it? Well, to take the punishment that you and I deserve for our rebellion against God. Jesus emptied his barn so that you and I could be filled. But you will only be able to receive that filling if you empty your barn. If we empty our barns of all the silly attempts we make to earn approval before God. If we empty our barns of all the things we rely on to make ourselves feel secure in this weak and fragile world. If we empty our barns of all the nonsense we look to try and provide some fleeting joy and pleasure. If you do that, then you will be free to stockpile Jesus, to become rich towards God, verse 21. And you know what? If you do that, the most startling thing will happen. Your grip, your vice-like grip on everything else will be loosened. All other things will become, well, they'll become things you can let go of. If Jesus is your treasure, if he is what you fill your barns with, then you'll be free to let go of money. You'll give generously to the poor. You'll give generously to the church's vision and purpose. And you won't stay awake at night worrying about how the collapse of the stock market has emptied your pension fund. You'll be free to let go of your grip on your reputation. You won't worry about whether your colleagues will think you're weird because you're a Christian. You'll joyfully take risks in sharing the gospel. And you'll be willing to let go of your stuff. Remortgaging your house so that you can give to the church building fund or so that you can help another church member to get on the property ladder. That will no longer be the unthinkable thing that it seems to be right now. And you know what? Even your life will be something that you can let go of. If you have filled your barn with Jesus, then not even coronavirus, when it does its worst, can strip you of your treasure. Now, isn't that an unexpected life hack from Jesus? Let me pray for us. Lord Jesus, thank you that you are the one who emptied your barn for us. Thank you that you are the one who made yourself nothing, who took the very form of a servant, who was born just like us, who was obedient even to death on a cross. And you did it so that we might be filled, so that we might be forgiven of all our sin and might have absolute, full and total approval before God, so that we might be secure in you, having an eternity that cannot be taken by anything, and so that we might know comfort, true comfort, resting, delighting in your love and all your goodness. Amen.